Hello, my amazing people. Good evening and welcome back again. If you are turning in, please do well to subscribe, like, comment, and share. Hey, my people. The news reaching us right now is the president of South Africa, Mr. Ramaphosa, have just humiliated America, just humiliated Donald Trump over this Iran war and everything. What other president in Africa cannot do, South Africa president just did it. He just tell Ramaphosa that to hell with him, America to hell with. In fact, let me not even go more deeper about it. Just watch this clip of video and don't forget to share your thoughts in the comment section. What Ramaphosa mean for this video? Seriously, my own president cannot dare try this. He's always afraid. Just watch out and share your thoughts in the comment section.
South Africa has just delivered a masterclass in standing tall against imperial bullying, and the United States' heavy-handed attempt to force Pretoria to ditch its ties with Iran has blown up spectacularly in Washington's face. What started as arrogant demands from the Trump administration has ended with South Africa not just refusing to bend, but publicly slapping down the empire's playbook. This isn't just diplomacy, it's a bold assertion of sovereignty that echoes the spirit of our liberation struggles. Let me break it down for you because the backstory here is crucial. It all kicked off when the new US ambassador to South Africa, Leo Brent Bosel III, a conservative activist handpicked by Trump, arrived in this country just last month and who, within days of taking his post, managed to ignite the most serious diplomatic confrontation between Pretoria and Washington in recent memory. In his first big public appearance, speaking to business leaders, Bosel went off on South Africa's foreign policy. He slammed the government for sending condolences to Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei after some incident tied to the ongoing mess, calling the man a terrorist and basically saying South Africa had no business associating with Iran's leadership. He even addressed the apartheid-era chant, "Kill the Boer, kill the farmer." Now, this chant has a complex history in South Africa. South Africa's own courts, independent courts operating within a constitutional democracy, have examined this chant extensively and ruled that it does not constitute hate speech when understood in its proper historical context as language from the anti-apartheid liberation struggle. You can agree or disagree with that ruling, but it is the ruling of South Africa's judiciary. And Bosel stood on South African soil in front of South African business leaders and said, and I want you to hear these words carefully.
Clarity on the "Kill the Boer" chant that we believe is hate speech. I'm sorry, I don't care what your courts say. It's hate speech.
I'm sorry, I don't care what your courts say, it's hate speech. I want you to sit with that for a moment. The representative of a foreign government, standing in your country, looking at your legal system, your independent, constitutional, democratically established legal system, and saying, I do not care what your courts say, your courts do not matter to me. If any other country's ambassador said that on American soil about an American court ruling, the response from Washington would have been volcanic. The ambassador would have been on a plane home before the day was over. But Bosel said it in South Africa about South African courts, because there is an assumption, and this is the assumption that drives so much of Western foreign policy toward Africa, that the rules apply differently here, that African institutions can be disrespected in ways that Western institutions cannot. But Bosel was not done, not even close. Here is where the situation went from tense to explosive. Here is what Bosel reportedly said, and these words are important, so listen to them carefully because they reveal everything about how Washington views its relationship with South Africa and with Africa more broadly. He reportedly said this about South Africa's relationship with Iran.
Insulting our president on the eve of coming to our country is not a good sign. Sending condolences letters to Iran after one of the world's greatest terrorists has been put down is not a good sign. They have to be resolved, and there are going to be some tough discussions ahead. But hopefully, South Africa will understand that it ought not to be aligning with international pariahs like Iran.
I must be frank with you, as the USA ambassador to South Africa, I don't like what your ANC and government did last week. They can't just insult my president Donald Trump for attacking Iran. I don't like what South Africa did in sending condolences to Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. They shouldn't do that. That man was a terrorist. Now I want you to understand what he was saying underneath those words, because on the surface it sounds like a complaint about condolences. But underneath it, the message is this. South Africa extended sympathy to a nation that America was bombing. South Africa, consistent with its non-aligned foreign policy tradition, a tradition it has maintained since 1994 as a deliberate sovereign choice, maintained its diplomatic relationship with Iran, even while America was at war with Iran. And Bozell was telling them, you cannot do that. You cannot do that because it upsets my president. You cannot do that because that man was a terrorist. You cannot do that because when we are at war with someone, you are expected to be at war with them too. What Bozell was really saying there, and this is the core of it, is that it is only America which gets to have allies. South Africa must remain non-aligned in ways that suit Washington. South Africa must stay away from America's enemies. African foreign policy independence is acceptable in theory, but when it conflicts with American preferences, it must yield. That is not a diplomatic position, that is an imperial one, and South Africa heard it exactly that way. The response from South Africa was immediate and it was sharp. Foreign Minister Ronald Lamola announced publicly, and the word publicly is important here because they wanted the world to see this, that Ambassador Bozell had been summoned. Summoned. That word carries diplomatic weight. That word in the language of international relations means you have crossed a line and we are requiring you to come and account for it. Not invited, not called in for coffee, summoned. Lamola was direct and unsparing in his public statement. On Bozell's comparison of black economic empowerment to apartheid, an analogy so offensive to South African history that it barely deserves the dignity of a rebuttal, but Lamola gave it one anyway. Broad-based black economic empowerment is not reverse races, as regrettably insinuated by the ambassador. It is a fundamental instrument designed to address the structural imbalances of South Africa's unique history. It is a constitutional imperative that the South African government can and will never abandon. And then Lamola added something that cut even deeper. The ambassador must not take us back to a polarized society along racial lines. Read that sentence and think about what it is saying to Washington. You sent us someone who is trying to re-racialize our society. You sent us someone who is delegitimizing our post-apartheid legal and economic architecture. You sent us someone whose entire posture appears designed not to build a relationship, but to deliver ultimatums wrapped in racial provocations. And we are telling you, clearly publicly on the record, that we will not accept that. Bozell, cornered, posted a social media statement saying his comments about the court ruling were his personal view and that the US government respects South Africa's judicial independence. A partial retreat, an attempted walk back. But here is the thing about walking something back. The words still happened. The room still heard them. The summons still happened. The signal was already sent and no tweet was going to unsend it. And now we arrive at the moment that makes this whole story something that will be studied and discussed for years. Zane Dangor, the Director General of South Africa's Department of International Relations and Cooperation, a man who does not typically make headlines, a technocrat of foreign policy, a career diplomat, but he sat down with Reuters over the weekend and he delivered what can only be described as South Africa's complete, total and irreversible rejection of the American agenda. On Iran, the demand that had started all of this, the pressure that Washington had been applying, the issue that Bozell had made the centerpiece of his diplomatic overreach, we have not any reason to cut ties with Iran. 6 words, 6 devastating words, no ambiguity, no diplomatic softening, no carefully constructed escape hatch that leaves room for Washington to claim a partial victory. We have no reason, none. The answer is no on dropping the genocide case against Israel, no on scrapping black economic empowerment laws, no on accepting the Afrikaner refugee program as legitimate, no. And then Dangor said something that I think deserves to go down in the annals of African diplomatic history. He said, we cannot be pulled into the sort of sphere of influence politics that great powers want to pull us into, and that in this instance includes the US. That sentence is the whole speech. That sentence contains within it the entire philosophy of post-apartheid South African foreign policy, the entire intellectual tradition of the non-aligned movement, the entire spirit of what it means for an African nation to insist on genuine independence in a world where great powers are always circling, always looking for leverage, always assuming that African sovereignty has a price. We will not be your satellite. We will not be your proxy. We will not subordinate our foreign policy to your geopolitical geopolitical wars. We have our own judgments to make, our own relationships to manage, our own values to uphold, and we will do that ourselves. Now, Dangor was careful to note, and this matters for context, that South Africa is not uncritical of Iran. Pretoria had actually called out Tehran for its violent crackdown on protesters earlier in the year and for its conduct in the broader regional conflict. This is not South Africa saying Iran can do no wrong. This is South Africa saying that its assessment of Iran is its own to make, that the decision about what kind of relationship to maintain with any country belongs to the South African government and to nobody else. Accountability without subordination, criticism without capitulation. That is what principled foreign policy looks like. Here's the part that should sting most for the Trump administration when they sit down and review how this played out. Because in trying to force South Africa into compliance, they achieved precisely the opposite. They made compliance politically impossible. When Bosel made his explosive comments, when he dismissed South Africa's courts, when he compared BEE to apartheid, when he essentially told the South African government that their relationship with Iran was an insult to his president, he did not weaken South Africa's resolve. He strengthened it. He handed the South African government a domestic political mandate to hold firm, because now any concession to American demands would look to the South African public not like constructive diplomacy, but like surrender to a bully. He made the no necessary not just in principle but in politics. This is what happens when you mistake a country's preference for good relations with a willingness to be subordinate. South Africa has always wanted a good relationship with the United States. Trade ties matter, investment matters, diplomatic cooperation matters, but there is a difference between wanting a good relationship and accepting that the price of that relationship is your sovereignty. South Africa drew that line, and Washington's heavy-handed approach made it impossible to back down from it. The 30% tariff is real. The economic consequences are real. In a country with 1/3 unemployment, those consequences are not abstractions. They are people's lives. And Pretoria is sitting with those consequences, bearing them, and still saying, we will not be bought, we will not be pressured, we will not cut ties with a country simply because you are at war with them. Our non-alignment is not a negotiating position, it is a principle. I want to step back from the specifics for a moment and talk about what this means at the continental level, because I think this moment is bigger than South Africa and bigger than Iran and bigger than any single diplomatic confrontation. Africa is at a pivot point right now. The old frameworks, the assumptions of Western dominance, the expectation that African governments would ultimately align themselves with Washington or Brussels, regardless of their public rhetoric, those frameworks are cracking. They are cracking in West Africa, where a wave of governments have evicted French military forces. They are cracking in East Africa, where the language of sovereignty and self-determination is louder than it has been in decades. And they are cracking right now, publicly and dramatically, in Pretoria. What South Africa has demonstrated this week is that the costs of sovereignty, while real, are bearable, that you can be hit with tariffs and still hold your line, that you can have your new ambassador lecture you about your own courts and still summon him to account, that you can face the full weight of American displeasure and still walk out of the room with your dignity and your foreign policy independence intact. That is a lesson. That is a demonstration. That is the kind of thing that other African governments watch very carefully, because every one of them is managing their own version of this dynamic, the pressure to align, the incentive to comply, the cost of genuine independence. Kwame Nkrumah said that the African Revolution required not just political freedom but economic and psychological freedom, the freedom from the internalized assumption that African decisions must ultimately defer to Western preferences. South Africa just provided a masterclass in what that psychological freedom looks like in practice. It does not look like hostility. It does not look like recklessness. It looks like a man sitting down with Reuters and saying calmly and completely, we have no reason to cut those ties and we will not. Let me close by giving you the score, because this story deserves a clear conclusion. America came to South Africa with a list: drop the ICJ case, scrap BEE, accept the Afrikaner refugee narrative, cut ties with Iran, align yourself with our geopolitical preferences, stop embarrassing my president, that was the list, South Africa's answer, delivered through a summoning, through a foreign minister's press conference, and through a Director General's Reuters interview, was no to every single item on that list, without apology, without equivocation, without leaving Washington any face-saving interpretation of events. They summoned the ambassador, they rejected his court comments, they defended their constitution, they explained their foreign policy principles. And then they looked at the biggest demand: cut ties with Iran, align yourself with our war. And they said, for the entire world to hear, we have not any reason to do that. That is not a minor diplomatic development. That is a country that has been pushed to its limits, deciding in public with full awareness of the consequences that its sovereignty is non-negotiable. That is an African government telling a Western superpower, we heard your demands, we considered them, and our answer is no. Washington's campaign to bring South Africa to heel has not just failed, it has backfired so completely, so spectacularly, that it has produced a stronger, more explicit, more publicly committed assertion of South African sovereignty than existed before the pressure began. And across this continent tonight, people are watching, governments are watching, leaders are watching, and some of them are beginning to wonder whether this is the moment, whether this is the proof of concept that they have been waiting for, that Africa can say no and still stand, that sovereignty is not just a word for speeches, that independence, real independence, is possible even when the pressure is real and the costs are high. South Africa has spoken, and the message is clear. Africa will not be managed, it will not be bullied, and it will not be pulled into anyone else's sphere of influence. Not anymore.
If you are a true South African, I want you to listen to this video. I want you to hear what former President Obama said about South Africa. What he said about Donald Trump and what he said about America. Guys, America is going down. South Africa has really humiliated America. Oh, in a big way. And I know that Donald Trump will be waiting for 2026 to eat back. But watch what Obama said about the G20, about the absence of the America, the embarrassment. I really want to congratulate President Ramaphosa. He has made Africa proud, not just South Africa. Just watch the video.
So let's talk about Johannesburg, the G20 summit. This is the Super Bowl of diplomacy. It's where the leaders of the 20 biggest economies meet to steer the world. It is where we protect American jobs, where we secure our supply chains, and where we make sure the rules of the road, our workers and our businesses. For decades, no American president would dream of missing it. It is simply too important. But today, for the first time in history, the United States is missing in action. President Trump has refused to attend. He has boycotted the summit entirely. And the reason he gave, he cited stories about the persecution of minority populations in South Africa, stories that our own intelligence agencies and diplomats on the ground have not verified in the way he describes. Now, protecting human rights is vital. It is who we are. But you don't protect human rights by staying home and sulking. You go there, you look leaders in the eye, you press them, you do the hard work of diplomacy. Instead, we stayed home, and here is the heartbreaking part. The world moved on without us while the president sat this one out. The other 19 leaders didn't wait. They went ahead and drafted a declaration. They set the agenda for the global economy without a single American voice in the room. Think about that. Decisions about trade, about energy, about the future of money itself. Decisions that will affect your wallet and your children's future were made today without America having a say. We are seeing something unprecedented. We are seeing an America that is isolating itself, not out of strength, but out of fear and grievance. And while some folks might cheer this as sticking it to the globalists, the reality is much colder. When we step back, others step in. China was there. Russia's representatives were there. Europe was there. They're writing the rules now, and we are leaving ourselves out in the cold. This isn't about one man. This is about who we are as a country. Are we the leader of the free world? Or are we an island? Because right now, looking at that empty chair in South Africa, I don't see strength. I see a retreat that leaves us smaller, weaker, and more alone. And I know deep down that the American people deserve better than to be sidelined in the story of our own future. Stick with me, because in the next part, I'm going to tell you exactly how the other world leaders reacted when they realized America wasn't coming, and the specific opportunities we just handed over to our competitors on a silver platter. You need to hear this. You know, when you walk into a room like the one at the Nasrec Expo Center in Johannesburg, there's usually a hum, a kind of electric energy. It's the sound of deals being made and the future being written. But today, the most deafening sound in that room was silence. Silence coming from the seat that should have been occupied by the President of the United States. I want you to really picture this. You have leaders from 19 of the most powerful countries on earth sitting around a massive circular table. You have President Ramaphosa of South Africa, the host looking to lead. You have President Xi of China. You have Prime Minister Modi of India. And right there, glaringly empty, is the spot reserved for America. Usually when the American president walks in, the room shifts, the conversation stops until we sit down. But today, they didn't wait. And that is what should keep you up at night. The moment they realized President Trump wasn't coming, and that he wasn't even sending Vice President Vance, but a junior embassy staffer, the mood changed. It shifted from confusion to calculation. I've been in these meetings. I know how these leaders think. When they saw that empty chair, they didn't see a protest. They saw an opening. President Xi didn't waste a second. He spent the day shaking hands, signing side deals, and presenting China as the reliable partner for the global South, while we were tweeting from home about grievances that the rest of the world has already investigated and dismissed. China was busy securing access to minerals, trade routes, and markets that rightfully should have been ours. And it gets worse. By the end of the day, something happened that has never happened in the history of the G20. They released a leaders' declaration, a joint statement on the global economy without the United States. Usually nothing gets signed unless we agree to it. We have always had the veto power of presence. But because we boycotted, they simply moved on. They wrote the rules for the next year of global trade, climate policy, and debt management without a single American protecting your interests. Think about what that means. It means the safeguards we usually fight for, protections for American workers, rules against intellectual property theft, standards for fair competition were likely left on the cutting room floor. We gave up our voice, we surrendered our leverage, and for what? To make a political point that only isolated us further. We are watching the torch being passed, not because someone took it from us.
Breaking news, South Africa tells America to go to hell. This was said by the ANC's Secretary General, Fikile Mbalula, who told the US ambassador to South Africa that he should actually go to hell and that South Africa will never bow to imperialist dictators. This comes after the ambassador to South Africa stated that US business interests are thinking like Google and Amazon are considering leaving South Africa because South Africa has refused to align itself with Israel and the United States of America in their war against Iran and the people of Palestine. And of course, South Africa and in the United States, their relationship has remained strained because of South African staunch support for Palestine. Follow for more.